Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle Mason, and I am currently the Student Success Advisor for the Center of Data and Society, as well as the BSU, or also known as the Black Student Union Advisor. As a proud recent graduate of CHC, I am inspired to be a part of organizing events where we can all learn from the past and help support the shaping of our current and future CHC community. Black History Month, which is celebrated each year during February, is a chance for Americans to learn details of our nation's history that unfortunately are far too often neglected and pushed to the wayside. Black history is American history, and President Gerald Ford officially recognized Black History Month in 1976. In celebration of Black History Month, the offices of DEI, Mission and Ministry, Student Life, and the Institute for Forgiveness and Reconciliation will be sponsoring this afternoon's special guest lecture with the Imam Idris Abdul Zahir to showcase social justice and a path to inclusion through honoring the past, shaping the future. This compelling lecture will showcase the intersections of the Black American Civil Rights Movement, social justice, and the ongoing struggles for inclusivity. We will all have the opportunity after this lecture to ask questions and start meaningful dialogue, and have the action to share a more inclusive and equitable future within and around our CHC community. CHC has many events during the month of February to celebrate Black History Month, and I would like to personally thank our BSU, as well as faculty, staff, student, and administrators for participating in many of these events. At this time, I would like to ask the co-director of DEI, Aziz Nathu, to come to the podium and introduce our guest lecturer.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm going to start with a quote from our scriptures, the Holy Quran, which we understand not to be a separate scripture, but a continuation of the Judeo-Christian monotheistic Abrahamic family of faiths. So this is in chapter 49, verse 13, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. This is a commandment and injunction to us, human beings. O human beings, we created you all from a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, so that you may know one another. Verily, the noblest of you in the sight of God is the most God-fearing of you. Surely Allah is all-knowing and all-aware. So now, when I said know, the word is lita'arafu in Arabic, which has a richness of meanings. It means to talk to each other, to dialogue, to communicate, to affirm, to confirm, to embrace, to share. It means so many different things. So it is an indication from our Lord to reach out to each other, members of the Abrahamic Judeo-Christian family, and also beyond that, so that we can all learn from each other. It is my privilege to be the first Muslim chaplain in Chestnut Hill College's storied 100-year history, and to be the conduit of building bridges of dialogue between our beloved institution and Imam Idris Abdul Zahir, who is, it's a long list, I have kind of a short version of that. First of all, he's our dear neighbor. He's a leader and brethren in the Abrahamic faith tradition of Islam. He's a leader in the African American and civil society, one who is invested in respectful dialogue and compassionate connections across the human family. He is the resident imam of a mosque nearby called Masjidullah, and also the center of the human excellence, and this is in West Oak Lane. He has been appointed to Governor Shapiro's Advisory Commission for African American Affairs. He's an advocate for civil, social, educational, cultural, and economic status of African Americans. He serves on the boards of Ceasefire PA, multiple interfaith initiatives, and is also an avid filmmaker and much, much more. I will end by stating a prayer. I will pray that our Almighty God help us walk on the straight path with compassion, with justice, and freedom for all humanity. And may our God make us the light we want to see in the world. Inshallah, God willing. Brother, we're honored to have you among us. Please come up.
Thank you, Aziz. And it is certainly my privilege to be here with you. I want to first thank Aziz for really reaching out to push through my calendar, push through the thousands of messages to really gain my attention to this event and to bring me here. So thank you for your effort. Thus far, I would say, President, that your staff has been so welcoming. The whole just reception has been beautiful. So I thank you for that. I'm thrilled to be here with you today to share just in a few moments just what we want to share for Black History Month. The theme was honoring the past and shaping the future. And we pray that it'll be of benefit to everyone that attends today and perhaps those that may view it in the future. So we thank you for your kind attention and for coming here to share with us here today. So I'm just going to say this from the outset, that this 30 minutes is only like, I'm going to tippy-toe on the tip of an iceberg on this particular topic. There's such richness here, there's such depth here that even 2 hours would not do it full justice, right? And we're talking about social justice. So what I attempted to do was to share with you some of the highlights in the past, honoring the past, because what? We have to know the past in order to know where we are on a timeline, and then be able to then look at where we are in the present and hopefully come together to shape the future. So anyone who does not have this context, it's hard to even have social interactions in America without knowing some of this history. You don't even know you're stepping on someone's toes unless you know some of this history. So as my brother said so beautifully, like if, as an imam, this is one of the verses that I would quote starting off something like this. I would then go into the Arabic, lita'arafu, and talk about the oneness and getting to know each other. This is all a rich part of our tradition, getting to know each other. And God said that he could have made us all one people. He could have. But he made us into different groups, nations, and tribes so that he might see who's the most righteous amongst us, who are going to be do the most good, who's going to work towards a race towards good. So with that, I'm going to endeavor, I'm going to time myself because I don't want to abuse my my invite here, right? I'm going to endeavor to just talk about social justice and the path towards inclusion. And we know that inclusion is it's a new word for us in the 21st century. This is not the language that my elders used or the groups that we're going to talk about here. So we'll use some language that is interchangeable a bit. But it's really important to understand that whether as the language changes and sometimes the approaches change, the goal is still the same. The goal of inclusion is still the same. The goal of having full citizenship, having all the rights that America offers, offered to everyone who calls themselves an American. And so this is just a glimpse into the struggle of the Black American community. And we are going to examine the different approaches from the different faith groups. One from the Black church and the Christian tradition, and also from the Black Muslims and the Islamic tradition. Now, I say Black Muslims in quotes, because this is not a term that the group themselves gave themselves. This is a term that the media gave the Nation of Islam. But I want to endeavor just to, in a few moments here, just talk through this storied history and kind of bring us into the future, or the current and then into the future. So if you may, just follow along with me here. So first, what are we talking about here? We're talking about segregation in America. Segregation in America. And those of you who are not familiar, many of you, I see you got the gray hair, you lost hair, you know what I'm talking about, right? You were born into a country that this was law, segregation was law, right? So I don't have to tell you anything. This is just a reminder for you, right? But for the folks that are younger, who never experienced this, who never saw this, who never even felt the impact of it, this was legalized segregation, legalized racism, legalized discrimination. We lived in a country not so long ago that included discriminatory practices in housing, education, employment, public facilities. Yes, public facilities. We couldn't even go to the bathroom together. And as you see in this illustration, or this picture here, we couldn't even drink from the same water fountains. So this is not too long ago. This was just a minute ago, as far as history is concerned. And so in this storied history came groups, and this has been the case throughout the African experience in America, that we've always had resistance. We've always had people that came together to try and change our condition. And it reminds me of a verse in the Quran from our tradition that said, God will not interfere. God will not change the condition of a people until they change themselves, meaning that you have to do something too. God gave you some skills, some intellect and ability to work towards your condition, changing your condition, and that's when he will work. But segregation in America was a really real thing, and it impacted every facet of the American life not too long ago. So I'm going to just go through a brief history here. Some of the key points: post-Reconstruction era America. This is after the Civil War and after Reconstruction, and Southern states enacted Jim Crow laws to enforce racial segregation in public facilities and accommodations. So there was a period after the Civil War when African Americans were kind of set free with nothing at all. Just, we're working on plantations for the entire lives, and then at some point set free. And miraculously, there were many instances where they were able to put together communities, get land at some point. Some small groups were able to make some progress. And what happened was there became some level of competition for jobs, for customers, for everything. And so these Jim Crow laws were put in place to kind of stifle that, to kind of put the African population, back into subjugation to a certain extent. And what followed thereafter was this important Supreme Court case decision. This is Plessy versus Ferguson, which established separate but equal. That's the reason why you saw that water fountain there just now. One water fountain, of course, looked way better than the other one, right? So it was separate. Definitely wasn't equal, but it was separate. This right here, this case was basically founded upon, again, African Americans resisting. Plessy decided to get on a train in Louisiana and got onto the whites-only car, and intentionally did it to be arrested and basically challenged the law and said, hey, this is unconstitutional because the 14th Amendment says that we have all these rights under the Constitution. Well, however, the laws are only as good as the people that enforce them. So even though later on this would be overturned about 100 years later, Plessy lost. And the Supreme Court voted 7-1. So only one dissenter that basically cited the 14th Amendment and stated that he believed that the 14th Amendment did support Plessy's case. So then separate but equal became the law for the land. And so you see all these things that continued to happen, the subjugation, the poor accommodations, even though our public, they're taking taxes from jobs and things like this, you still see the subjugation. So what happened was a great migration. So for generations, of course, African Americans, if we reference the 1619 Project and we say mass enslavement of Africans began in 1619, and you come forward to the end of slavery or enslavement here in America was 1865. So, but from that period, many Africans or enslaved Africans here, again, were turned loose with no reparations, giving nothing after generations had given everything. You were born, and then you had children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren, and on and on and on and on, worked for a family or families, and everything that you produced throughout all that time went to them. And so when they were let free, there was no reparations given, and that's one of the topics that keeps coming up today. If we look at African Americans in every social economic statistic that we can track, we can draw all of those deficits back to this particular happening. And so what happened was many of them would then end up working after slavery, went right back to working on the plantations where they were enslaved. And it was a process or a work arrangement called sharecropping, which somehow always ended with them either owing money or just breaking even though they were able to work the land and produce so much for the owner. So many of us, many African Americans were dissatisfied with this and decided to move north to cities like Philadelphia, cities like Boston, cities like Chicago, Detroit, places that had industry and were industrializing, and they could go and get jobs. Of course, they went from one trap, the sharecropping trap, to the urban trap in all of these major cities. So, but this great migration happened during this time period here, and they, of course, fell into more racial discrimination, even in the North, segregation in housing and employment. And those of you that are familiar with Philadelphia, I mean, it's pretty much broken up by race, right? Certain races live in certain neighborhoods, and for the longest time, up until probably recently, you didn't see much integration. There are some neighborhoods that have historically kind of, been a little integrated, but most are separated in that way. During this time period, the advent of the Nation of Islam, founded by Wallace Fard Muhammad, and it becomes a force advocating for black empowerment. We move into the Civil Rights era. We have Malcolm X, and his differentiation was, he said, this is a human problem. So he used the term human rights, right? But civil rights, human rights, it was all seeking the same thing, dignity for the African American people and equal rights. And in that iteration of Islam, they understood Islam to mean freedom, justice, and equality. So Islam wasn't just, for most, because I've talked to many of the folks that were around during this time period. I've interviewed them, and we've done documentaries and things like this. Many of them were seeking freedom, justice, and equality, and Islam was a conduit towards that. It was a catalyst towards it. It was a vehicle towards it. And even though they may have not subscribed to all of the theology of the Nation of Islam, they agreed with the social economic direction that was given. And so we also have the civil rights movement alongside of that, with activists like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and other folks that led protests and did legal challenges. And here are some significant ones, of course, the Montgomery bus boycott, and also the March on Washington. These are all things that most of us are familiar with. So this is where things begin to change. So we have civil rights legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, followed by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. They're passed. It outlaws segregation. It prohibits discrimination on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Now, this is critical, and I always use this example because it is profound. You are looking at, I'm standing here before you today. I am literally part of Generation X, which is African Americans, or Americans, but people born from 1965. Some say 1980. I think that's the date that they stopped by. I was born in 1979. So I'm part of Generation X. I'm part of the first generation of African Americans born completely free in America, meaning that I was born with all the rights of citizenship. My father wasn't born with that. My mother wasn't born with that. When my father was able to finally vote, it was at the same time that his father was able to vote. His grandmother, his great-grandmother was still living at the time. So again, this is very real, very recent. And the trajectory for my life, not to say that folks didn't have opportunities, but the trajectory for our generation is totally different than my father's generation, who's still around. He's still around, thank God, right? That's how real this is. I am literally the first generation in my family to be born with all the rights of American citizenship. So that's the reason why that was so key. The second part here, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. This is key for the Muslim community, mainly because prior to 1965, most of the immigration allowed to America was from European countries or European-friendly countries. This act right here, which was pushed by the civil rights movement, essentially opened up immigration from Muslim-majority countries. So it was basically your best and brightest from wherever the world you come from, and we're not going to discriminate. And so the example I always use is Pakistan, which was founded in 1947. The 20-year period between 1947 and 1965, only 2,500 Pakistanis were allowed into the country legally. The 20-year period after the Immigration Act, 100,000. The 20-year period after that, 250,000, right? So this was key for there to be a Muslim population other than African Americans, because at this point, most Muslims in America were of African descent. And once this act was enacted through the push of the civil rights legislation, the civil rights movement, now we have a blossoming of the Muslim community from all parts of the world, from Muslim majority countries in Africa to Asia, Southeast Asian continent as well, and other parts of the world as well. Also from a lot of folks from South America as well. Really critical. And so then we have a legacy after that in the 1970s of the next generation of leaders coming up and creating, carrying the banner forward. Jesse Jackson, he founds the Operation Push in 1971, which later became a Rainbow Push Coalition. He founded two different organizations and then combined them at some point. Al Sharpton starts the National Youth Movement, and then later, in the early 90s, he starts the National Action Network. So this is the next generation of leaders. For the Muslims, Imam Wharf bin Muhammad, he ascends to the Nation of Islam leadership in 1975, and he starts to shift the theology, the political approach, and made a drastic change in how things were applied. So we're going to go into now inclusion. We got a little piece of the past. Here's the major difference between these two groups, the black Christians or the black church and the Muslims, right? Integration versus separation. Now, again, these are all responses to segregation. These are all responses to unfair treatment, and different groups had different approaches on how to address this. Historically, this has always been a thing in the black community, right? We had W.E.B. Du Bois who challenged Robeson and other folks, had differences on how they intended to address white supremacy and discrimination. And so too with the black church and the black Muslims. The difference, again, integration was the black church, again, emphasizes the inclusion of African Americans into mainstream American society, wants equal rights, opportunities, and access to institutions regardless of race, and promotes, again, nonviolent resistance and collaboration with white allies to achieve civil rights goals. So that was an approach. And I'm going to tell you that even though we look back on it now and it won the day, at the time, many in the black church did not agree with, especially the nonviolent part, okay? This was not a popular thing. But this is the research, again, that the movement did. Martin Luther King Jr. looking to Gandhi and the struggle that he had over in India, and looking to the success of being nonviolent. And so that was the approach of the black church, not monotheistic or not a monolith, of course, but of course one of the main points or one of the main drivers. Black Muslims were on separation. Advocates for establishment of separate and autonomous society of African Americans. Now, again, in today's world, that sounds kind of like, okay, that's a little far-fetched, right? But during this time, you gotta understand, a lot of these folks grew up with separate but equal. Everything was separate but equal, so everybody had their own thing. Everybody was in their own corner. Even after, of course, the conquest of America, the natives were put on reservations. They were put into different places, and you had your own little thing, and you did your own council, and you governed your own people. So this was not as far-fetched. And again, emphasizes self-reliance. One of the taglines was "do for self." Do for self. And you'll hear that now in popular music. You'll hear that in the black community. You go places, people will say, do for self. This is something that came from the black Muslim movement. Self-determination, economic independence within black communities. Again, promote self-defense and resistance against systemic racism and white supremacy. So, and this is because just like the black church, I just visited the 16th Street Baptist Church in Alabama this past year, last summer. Never thought I'd go there. I went there for a conference, and some of the folks that were part of the protest there, and the sister of one of the 4 little girls that was killed during the bombing was there, and she spoke. And we got a chance to go visit the church. It was a very real thing that places of worship would be bombed during that time. And it was targeted and bombed because Martin Luther King came to the church about 2 weeks earlier and had led a march, again, for civil rights, and the march started at the church. So the church and our places of worship have always been a place of sanctuary for the black community, and it's been a place where we organized. So it was sacred ground, and just so happened the pastor there is a guy from Philadelphia. So good for him, right? So, but that being said, that was the thing for the black church, but also the black mosque. So there were many instances where police raided mosques, shot and killed unarmed people who died sometimes, and sometimes they were, maimed or whatever. But the point is, though, is that our places of worship have always been under attack from racist element in this country. That's part of why I even still you know, our tradition is to have security wherever I travel now, right? And I met my security guard when I was training in self-defense. So it's part of the culture now of our faith, right? To be able to defend ourselves because we've always been under attack. So I'm going to now go through some examples of this integration versus separation, just to really bring it into full view. So this is Ruby Bridges. I'm sure many of you know who Ruby Bridges is. She was part of an effort to integrate schools in New Orleans. But again, this was 6 years after the Supreme Court basically upheld Brown versus the Board of Education and declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional. It still was 6 years after where they had to have armed guards take this little 6-year-old girl to school because that's how dangerous it was for African Americans to go to school other than with African Americans. And so this was the approach, again, of civil rights movement, NAACP, and others to push them, force them way into institutions and to be accepted. Whereas the black Muslims did something totally different. This is Clara Muhammad. Many of you may not know who she is. She was the wife of Elijah Muhammad, who was the leader of the Nation of Islam. She started the homeschool movement amongst African Americans. She did not want to send her children to public schools. She didn't think that they would care for them and would not teach them what they needed to know to survive as African Americans in this environment. So she spearheaded a lot of the educational initiatives and helped found what was called the University of Islam. Later on, when her son took over, she had passed by then, but when her son took over the Nation of Islam, he renamed all the University of Islams to Sister Clara Muhammad schools after his mother. But the whole point was to develop a sense of community in the youth, promote, again, self-determination, and to actually have a safe environment for these young black babies to grow. At its height, it had 74 schools across the nation and the Caribbean. And many of them are still in operation today. And many of the temples or mosques that are still in association with this group, at the very least, have a Sunday school that teaches Islam. Civil rights movement, sit-ins. The one here is the very famous one, the Woolworth counter sit-in in Jackson, Mississippi in 1963. And so this is the nonviolent movement. As you see, white allies there with our folks there. And they're sitting at a counter and just taking all forms of abuse. I mean, just having condiments just poured all over their heads. And they were trained to do this. They were trained. They were brought into rooms and had things poured on them multiple times prior to even going into this environment. So they were trained and sent here and went through this humiliation just to work towards bringing us together, bringing us out of segregation. And this is the Muslims now. And they said, we don't want to come to your restaurants. You don't want us there? I don't want to be there. And they decided to make their own restaurants. So you had different iterations of the restaurant. So you had some that were owned by the Nation of Islam. Then you had others that were owned by private members of the Nation of Islam. And my in-laws actually had a restaurant in Durham, North Carolina. It was called From the Pond to the Pan, where they did a lot of seafood and fish, right? And so their approach was, okay, we will serve our own people. We'll have our own restaurants. And this picture over here is their own supermarkets. And those were branded Your Market or Our Market for the most part. So again, it was self-determination. Their answer towards it was, okay, we don't want to be humiliated like that. That's fine. We'll establish our own. And it helped to establish themselves financially, economically. It served as a place to do organizing and just a social hub as well. So in comes Imam Warfdi Muhammad. His ascent to leadership to the Nation of Islam is so key. This is not doing it any justice, to tell the truth. But he came into leadership, and I mentioned to the folks that were with me earlier today, he had been teaching in the Nation of Islam as a minister since 1958 in Philadelphia here. Since 1958, he had been teaching Orthodox Islam to many of the people in Philadelphia. And he disagreed with his father on many of the tenets of what was taught at the Nation of Islam. So long story short, he was thrown out of the nation multiple times and let back in and thrown out and let back in. And after the assassination of Malcolm X, he came back in again to help firm up the nation and keep things together and not have a civil war amongst the black Muslims. But what he did when he took over was essentially moved the Nation of Islam away from a black nationalist group to a universal brotherhood. We had tolerance, interfaith. Many of the interfaith, as my brother mentioned, as part of my bio, all the interfaith work that we do, it's because of this man. It's because he saw the future. He said, we're in America, we're going to be citizens of America, and by darn it, our ancestors built America, like not figuratively, but literally, and we should have all the benefits that come along with what America offers. And so this is where you see him at the mosque carrying the American flag and telling us to be Muslim, and fully American, and shifted the whole mentality towards inclusion in a way that was different than previously. And I want to talk about that just really quickly because that is a difference. The difference was the black church sought to integrate and saw inclusion in a way of being able to go into the same spaces as their white counterparts, to be able to pray in the same spaces, to go to school in the same spaces, to ride the same bus in the same seats next to each other as we are here today. This is revolutionary right here. This wouldn't have happened during the 50s or the 40s, right? The black Muslim solution was, yes, we want inclusion, but we want to come to the table of humanity as an equal. So you have a store, I got my store. You have your neighborhood, I have my neighborhood. You have your institutions, I have my institutions. Now we can respect each other, right? Because we're coming to the table as equals. And their philosophy was that the black man in America would never get respect, would never earn the respect of anyone in the world until he had what everyone else had, right? Which was establishment, his own neighborhoods, fed his own people, clothed them, and provided housing and food, clothing, and shelter, all those things. So those are the two different approaches, all working towards the same thing. Dignity for the African American, breaking down segregation, and being able to have self-reliance, self-dignity. I'm running up on time here, okay. So the path forward. What we deal with, again, still in this day, is poverty. Any Bob Marley fans here? Bob Marley fans? Only a few? What's going on here? Bob Marley fans, put your hands up, come on. Did you see the movie? No. You saw it? Okay. So Bob Marley says in the first major release, it was called Catch a Fire. And it's a song called Slave Driver. And he sings, today they say that we are free, only to be chained in poverty. Y'all know you was going to get a whole concert too, right? So today they say that we are free, only to be chained in poverty. Good God, I think it's illiteracy. It's only a machine to make money, right? So he's singing this in the early 70s, which is that even though we're free now, even though we have civil rights now, we can get on the same bus, we can go to the same schools and all that, we're still broke. We don't have anything. We don't have anything. And there's many statistics on the black dollar, right, and how quickly it leaves the black community. It's because the black community does not own the infrastructure to sustain black life. So you go into most black communities across the country, The corner store is not owned by the black community. Where they shop, the groceries is not owned by the black community. Where they get their clothes is not owned by the black community. Where I'm from in Germantown, almost 60% of the people who live there rent, okay? So we don't even own the homes most of the time that we live in. So it's the poverty. Malcolm X very articulately expressed this. When you live in a poor neighborhood, you are living in an area where you have poor schools. When you have poor schools, you have poor teachers. When you have poor teachers, you get a poor education. When you get a poor education, you can only work in a poor-paying job. And that poor-paying job enables you to live again in a poor neighborhood. So it's a very vicious cycle. And that's the reason why institutions like Chestnut Hill are really, really important, because of the fact that it allows people to break through that cycle of poverty to get into the middle class. And what we've seen is statistics that continue to grow. Since the end of segregation, since the end of basically legal discrimination, we've seen the black middle class grow. It's not growing at the same rate as others because there's still barriers, but access to institutions of higher learning absolutely is one of the solutions to break that cycle. Next is economic opportunity. Now this, how many folks know who this guy is right here? A couple people do. It's a shame, right? This is Reverend Leon Sullivan. As it says here, he was a prominent African-American civil rights leader and the driving force behind Progress Plaza, which is in North Philly on Broad Street, and is still there today. As it states, the first African-American owned and operated shopping center in the United States. Like, that didn't happen, this was the 1970s. Sorry, 1968, I think it was, 1968. The first one in 1968. He led a plan where he brought the black church together, and he had it was called a 1036 plan. I think I'm doing it right. Which was everybody would give $10 for, I think, 36 months, I think it was, which allowed for them to pull their money together. They raised about $2.5 million, which enabled them to purchase this property and develop it into Progress Plaza. And what's really important is that this was juxtaposed to what was happening in 1968. In 1968 is when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And as we know, we had riots across the country. And the theme at that time was burn, baby, burn. Because the feeling in America amongst African Americans was, listen, if I can't even have a leader who was nonviolent, who led people with peace and through love, if you're going to assassinate that guy, then no one this whole thing is coming down, right? So he then wrote a book called Build, Brother, Build. And that was his answer. It wasn't burn, baby, burn. It was build, brother, build, right? It was establish something for yourself. Again, and he was now this was a reverend, but he was heavily influenced by the black Muslim movement. He borrowed from Elijah Muhammad, who was also on self-determination. So we see that investment in underserved communities and small businesses can foster economic growth and create jobs. So one of the issues that he ran into was that after they created this beautiful plaza, which again is still there today, he realized that many of his people could not fill the jobs. They were not qualified. They didn't have the skill set. So then he established a nonprofit to then give job skills. It's called OIC. It's still there today, too, on North Broad Street, a few blocks down from Progress Plaza. So then he would bring, dozens and dozens of youth, get them trained up, and then we're able to do job placement. So again, pushing for the economic growth to address those systematic barriers and trying to provide solutions to those issues. And he's a legend here in Philadelphia area. And it's a shame that more people don't know who he is. To get his book, which is not in print anymore, I had to get it from a bookstore in Atlanta. And the copy that I got, someone had their AT&T bill from like 1994 inside of it. That's like a bookmark. So it's a shame, but that book should be mandatory reading in Philadelphia public schools. And we probably should see that happens. Education, okay? Creating better outcomes for African Americans in public schools requires a multifaceted approach that addresses systemic inequalities, and provides equitable opportunities for all students. The first one, this includes increasing funding for schools. So historically, the Philadelphia School District has been underfunded, grossly underfunded. And one of the historic things that our new administration with the governor has done this past, I think it was August, they signed into law historic investments in public education. There was a ruling earlier that basically said that it was unconstitutional for the funding to continue the way it was, that the Philadelphia students were being robbed of their proper share of funding. So this is critical to shifting, to changing things. Political engagement. So I have known his brother personally, and I interviewed him a few times as well and just spoke with him not too long ago. But this is Keith Ellison. He's an American politician who served as Attorney General in Minnesota. But most famously, he was one of the first. He was the first Muslim to hold office in Congress. And when he was sworn into office, he was sworn in on Thomas Jefferson's Quran, not his Bible, but his Quran. So one of our founding fathers owned the Quran, and clearly Muslims, we know he read it and used it, because much of what is in the Constitution and what we see in those founding documents are pulled right from those source documents. We see the connections. So political engagement is crucial for African Americans as it allows them to advocate for their rights, interests, concerns within the political system. And nothing is more probably a great example of this. This gentleman happened to be Attorney General when the George Floyd case came up. Initially, the cops were going to get off pretty lightly. It was raised up to the AG's office, and he was able to then, look at it objectively and then bring more serious charges. I think some of the most serious charges that were brought basically were able to convict them on it and, put them behind bars for a decent amount of time. Certainly an amount that would not have caused a riot in America, right? Because there had been, again, a history of police brutality, African Americans unarmed, being shot, being killed, being beat up, and no justice whatsoever. And it is a whole history of lynchings, too, that I can't get into today. But so this gentleman being in place, and again, this gentleman follows the teachings of Imam Wafdi Muhammad. So it was Imam Wafdi Muhammad who came in, who changed the teaching of the Nation of Islam, who said we should go and be a part of America. We're American citizens too. We should be in Congress. We should be in the military. We should be in offices of power, right? He listens to that command and he goes. And here he is. And he's in position now to bring justice. Perfect example of when you actually work in the political engagement and what the outcome can be when you do that. So what's the thing for today and into the future, right? We have to protect the progress. We're seeing many things that have been, I guess, taken for granted by my generation go to the wayside and be overturned. Most notably, recently, affirmative action. So colleges and universities essentially cannot use that any further into the future as part of their determining factor in bringing people onto campus. And this was something that was brought forward because of, again, white supremacy and some of the discrimination that many African Americans and non-whites would experience when trying to apply for college, when just trying to get higher education. There was a lot of discrimination involved. So this protection was put in place to make sure that, that the opportunity was there. And the opponents of it always tried to characterize it as if it was a unfair one-uppance, but really it was to make sure that a requisite amount qualified were able to also go to college. And so again, the big thing now is to protect the progress of the civil rights movement, of all the freedom fighters who came before, who established the norms that we have today. There are people out there who do not like those norms, who do not like all of the progress, and they're fearful of the progress and frankly want to turn back the clock on those things. So this is why the richness of these two different faith traditions is so critical. But when we examine it just for these few minutes, and I'm over time now, but the point is, though, is that what we see is we saw two different approaches from two different faith groups using their faith to inform how they were going to engage. And then when it made sense, when times changed, we saw Imam Wafdi Muhammad kind of use the best of Martin Luther King and the best of Malcolm X and put it together and say, okay, now we're going to go into engage the society in a different way, still searching, still pushing forward progress for that inclusion, for that diversity, and for that equity. And so that is why we're all here today. That's why we can come here as a Muslim and speak at a Catholic college and be so warmly welcomed, right? Because people paid the price. People gave their lives even, right? And so it's something that we can't take for granted. It's something that we have to cherish. We have to examine quite often because there are other people who are on the other side of this who are looking to have us back to marching to the streets again and doing all the things that we had to do to secure those rights. So I thank you for your kind attention. Would love to take any questions that you might have. Okay, I'm staying here. Okay.
Hello. Thank you so much, Imam, for that
quite
profound
welcome.
and informative presentation. I
quite
think we
welcome.
all learned a whole lot from that. Me and Celia Brown, we just have a couple questions for you.
Awesome.
For some of the people who didn't make it to the lunch and just have some general questions about you and what you do. So our first question for you, could you tell us more about how your faith informs your work for justice and advocacy for your community?
How my faith informs it. So essentially my faith, calls to justice. One of the seminal verses in the Quran tells us to be just, even against ourselves, to be just. And so when you're in a society where you see injustice at times, it makes it incumbent upon us as people that are called to do what's right and forbid what's wrong, to speak up. The Prophet Muhammad had a saying, when you see something wrong, you should change it physically if you can, right? Take action against it. If you can't do that, then speak up against it. And if you can't do that, then hate it in your heart. But that's the weakest of faith, right? So the first thing we want to do, if we have the ability and have the strength of faith and courage, is to take action against injustice. So my faith tells me to do that. And of course, there's no shortage of injustice anywhere in the world at any given time. So of course we have to prioritize things as we see fit. But the whole point is, though, is that the driving part of our faith, and again, from the tradition in which I come from, which is that Islam was introduced to African Americans as a freedom movement, as a movement for freedom, justice, and equality. So we're constantly seeking that, and we're constantly looking to secure that, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. So we want to be advocates for everyone to have freedom, justice, and equality. And that's really part of the driving force, and that's the reason why we do the work that we do. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
What has led you to become an imam?
What led me? So I'll tell you honestly, I never intended on being an imam. So my father retired as an imam. My father-in-law is an imam. His father-in-law before him was an imam, and my brother-in-law is an imam. I had no interest in being an imam. My plan for myself was I had a film, a production company, a video production company, and I shot documentaries, and every now and then I would do something for the Muslim community because I saw just a gross representation of the Muslim community in popular media. And it drove me to do a web series called Ask a Muslim, where I brought people in. I brought Keith Ellison in to answer questions. I went down to Love Park in Philadelphia, random folks coming through, and had them ask their questions about the Muslim faith and about Islam. And I took them to different folks from different parts of the country to answer, and I kind of put it together in a kind of humorous way, just to answer those questions and to kind of shift perception on Muslims. But I thought that was going to be my contribution. I just started another project to do a short documentary series. So that was my intent. What happened was, and this is part of God's plan, right? Which is that I found myself always in some positions doing something for the Muslim community. When I was at Central High School with Tariq Khan, we had the Muslim Students Association there. I went on to Temple University. I became president of the Muslim Students Association there. I was vice president of the Muslim Youth Association. I went on to host conferences and do banquets for a lot of the Muslim associations in Philadelphia. And I had studied and I had done things along the way that put me like in that realm. And what happened was essentially I was asked to give a sermon. Now I had been being asked to give a sermon since I was like 20 years old. I didn't finally say yes till I was like about 36, right? And I only did it because of the fact that the imam who asked me is and was then and is now one of the hardest working men I knew. He was everywhere doing everything. He was at the masjid. He was in the community. He was just doing a lot of work and still had a 9 to 5. I'm like, how are you doing all this stuff? Like, what is going on here? So I felt like I'm going to help this brother because he's doing a whole lot of great things for the community. And so long story short, I said yes. So I did a sermon. Now, it's different than in the Christian tradition, whereas you don't have to necessarily go through any ordainment or anything to be an imam. Just people have to choose you, right? And of course, you need to know a few things. So long story short, I gave a sermon. People liked it. He asked me again. They liked it again. He asked me again. They liked it some more. And then he started calling me imam. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not an imam. The person who gives the talk on Fridays, which is our holy day, is called a khatib, a speaker. Now, some imams are khatibs as well, right? But not all khatibs are imams, right? So essentially, I was like, no, I'm just a khatib. But long story short, after about a year or so of me helping him out, going out to the community with him, he finally asked me to be his assistant imam, and I reluctantly said yes, just because of the heavy responsibility. You know, again, we have our own plan for our own life, right? And when you are put into that position, you have to actually live what you say out of your mouth, which is tough for the average person. But when you are put into this position, people hold you at a higher standard, right? And I was always fearful of having to live up to a standard that even maybe I didn't want to live up to, right? So it was a thing that I reluctantly accepted. But But God willing, over time, I assisted him for like 2 years. And then when his tenure ended, I was elected as the senior imam, which came as a shock to me because there were people that were more qualified than me to be the imam. But I think people, wanted something different. I am something different. And it happened maybe a week or two before the pandemic started. So it helped that I had a background in IT. So as I explained earlier, I was IT director for a department in the city. I was IT manager for another department for years. So I was versed in the IT space, IT professional. And so when the pandemic happened, it was like, a fish to water. And so I got to be everywhere. I was on BBC News, NBC. My first appearance on the Today Show was virtual. So I got to be everywhere, and it helped me be able to manage my regular duties and then also the imam's duties. So that's how I got into it. And then as time went on, I started to say, okay, this might actually work out a little bit. So let me actually start to try to do this the right way now. So I have, so I added staff, and my family, my wife is here, helped me tremendously to make it work. And it's still a work in progress. I'm 4 years in now. I think we're doing a pretty good job. But there's always more to do.
Okay. What qualities do you think are necessary for relationships to be fair and just? And what are some of the best practices for cultivating just relationships?
Yeah, so humility. Humility has to be, I think, at the center of just relationships. Many of the times when we are unjust to each other and to ourselves, it's because we have ego. We have ego and arrogance sometimes. You make a mistake or you mistreat someone, you don't want to say, I'm sorry. You don't want to apologize. You don't want to admit that you made a mistake. In this society, how we are trained in school, mistakes are bad, right? Like you want to get a 100 and perfect on the test. Now I'm not suggesting we should change anything here, right? Right. But I'm just saying that that's how we are trained, that making a mistake is bad and getting everything right is perfect, and that's what you should be. And we know as human beings, innately, we are going to have issues, we're going to have problems, and we're going to mess up, right? So I think humility should be at the core of just relationships. And you cultivate it, I think, by being sincere, right? Sincerity is really a big part of that, too. So humility and sincerity, I think, have to be at the core of being just and also cultivating justness. I think because ultimately, when we allow ego to creep in, arrogance to creep in, it then prevents the possibility for us to then do the right thing when it calls for it. That's what I would offer.
Thank you.
Awesome. These are more questioners here? What's happening here? What's happening here?
With this time, hi, I'm Zay.
Oh, and I'm Sky.
And with this time, we would like to point questions toward the audience, if you guys have any. Yes, in the back.
So one of your slides is talking about like protecting progress of everything that's going on. So my question to you is like, in terms of that, do you believe that like my generation, for example, like we don't have nobody that lives to lead us in that in protecting our community. Even within our community, there's a lot of division within that. So before that, you had Gandhi, you had Margaret, you had people like Muhammad Ali. Now we live in a society where people are scared to speak up about justice, whether they're in positions where they're athletes or even actors or any type of celebrity, they're scared to speak out and be that change. So how is it that people my age or even younger that's coming behind you, who do we look to and be like, okay, that's the person that's going to lead the next revolution. That's the person that we can follow. We have people like let's say Dr. Umar, we have like Sarita Sheik, but even when those people in their Yeah. So that's a very, very interesting question. My first thought was look to you, right? We have to be the change that we're looking to see in the world, right? I'm gonna start there. The second thing I'm gonna say before I answer the other part of it is what you're speaking on is a very real thing, which is the trauma that came to a whole generation, to a whole people, from seeing all their leaders, all their stars be assassinated, right? Because you're not just talking about Martin. Medgar was assassinated right in front of his front door for pushing for voting rights. So Medgar Evers. This is one decade. Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara. These are all folks in Africa as well, right? The previous generation, Marcus Garvey, was deported, right? So what does that teach a generation? It says that if you speak up, if you fight for your people, if you're brave, if you stand with your back straight, we're going to kill you, right? Even in the work that I do, this is a very real thing for me, right? I don't take it lightly. I watch what I say to a certain extent, right? Because of the fact that I'm sure I got an FBI file somewhere, all right? I'm saying it jokingly, but it's real, right? And it's not that I walk around with a fear like that, right? Because I know ultimately we all, our human lives are like this, man. I mean, if we look at, so we only here for a little while anyway, right? But the whole point is, though, is that there's trauma associated with that. So oftentimes I talk about Malcolm X and how he died for the movement. Imam Wafdi Muhammad picked up where Malcolm X left off. Many people don't even know his name because he decided to take a different route. He decided to approach it differently because you can imagine all of his peers being assassinated. So his approach was different. And so I say, if Malcolm died for the movement, Wafdi Muhammad, he lived for it. Meaning that he had to make different decisions and be wiser so he could survive long enough to lead his people. So what I would say is this to my next generation. First off, part of what you're doing here today is revolutionary, which is that you're coming to learn about the past, right? Learn about what took place, what the good was, what the bad was, what the different approaches were, right? And it helps inform how you're going to engage into the future. Now, I think just in general, America, not just black people, but America in general, we're off of that, one savior kind of thing. Like America don't respect teachers the way they used to, parents the way they used to, public figures the way they used to. It's just everything out the window right now, right? So what I would say is what I see as the next iteration of change, and this is what Imam Wafdi Muhammad tried to do in his leadership. There's a great book out there called, I'm gonna try to get it in the right order. I think it's called The Starfish and the Spider. The Starfish and the Spider. It talks about centralized and decentralized organizations, right? So a spider has what, 8 legs, you cut the head off, it's dead. Starfish has, 6 legs, whatever it is, right? You cut it off, it regenerates. And it creates a new starfish, right? So, and it goes through history and talks about decentralized organizations and how they are typically, they stand up to failure better. They stand up to disruption better. Because if you have one leader, if you assassinate that leader, the movement is over. If you have one leader, you pay him off, the movement is over. If you have one leader, you blackmail him, the movement is over, right? So what you want is to have a group. You want to have people dedicated to a cause, and you want to look at that book. Read that book. It's a really great book. The Starfish and the Spider talks about decentralized leadership. And Imam Wafdi Muhammad, he inherited the Nation of Islam, which was very militaristic. It had a chain of command. He decentralized the whole entire thing. He said, listen, I'm the Imam, but this is an association now. Every individual mosque is you run your own individual mosque. Don't send any money to Chicago anymore. You keep it for your own mosque. And if you want to follow me, you can follow me. But if you don't, that's fine. This is an association. There's no compulsion. As a matter of fact, there's a verse in the Quran, right? La ikraha fid din. There's no compulsion in the religion, right? So that was his approach. He decentralized it so that people would be gunning for his head. Because now it's decentralized. And now that's why you can have a strong organization in Philadelphia. We have one in Atlanta. We have one in LA. We have places in Detroit, Chicago. Every major city has a mosque associated with in our association. But if any individual mosque falls, the rest of the organization does not fall. And currently, we don't have one leader. We have a convening of leaders. And there's only a convener. The convener doesn't make decisions for everyone. He just brings people together as a body to make decisions for the body. So I would offer that to you. And then for you, I would say start training. And praying, right? Pray first, then train. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I want to first say I appreciate you for coming up, and if I can be honest with you, the school is currently going through an audit, and I help out with that audit. I was only supposed to be here for 15 minutes to get back in office. So I sincerely appreciate this.
Awesome, thank you.
I want to, it's funny, Casey asked a similar question that I had, and I want to know if you can expound on it more, because I too see his point, which is a lot of our leaders are, when I say leaders, I'm meaning black leaders, are usually assassinated. And a lot of our movement is usually tarnished. You can tell by the items that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they shut down the black business over there. They ran a highway or 95 through Florida and stopped the black business in Opa-locka. They ran, I think, a highway in New York where they stopped the businesses in Harlem. And then we have individuals who I want to say post or prop up as leaders in today's genre, but then they're usually not assassinated physically, but their character is assassinated through various means. I can speak to Will Smith, I can speak to T.D. Jakes, so recent. You can speak to many leaders who are usually assassinated through characterization, but although you're saying that it should be decentralized, in some regards I look to having a leader who will stand up and not necessarily be martyred or assassinated through characterization, but to stand up in a way that galvanizes the next generation. I say that being here is not only an individual who works in the accounting department, but an individual who sees himself as a mentor to the youth and trying to figure out how to more so galvanize them in the right direction. And they're looking to somebody to lead them. And although I'm here as a voice in a decentralized manner as you speak about, they're still looking to somebody, as you spoke about 2 seconds ago. So how do we kind of, although it's like a double down on that question, like how do we kind of get to that space where like a person like yourself would take on that mantle?
Yeah. So let me give you a bit more who I am, right? So I'm an E-man, which is a leader. I'm currently chief of staff of a large department for the city. That's a leader, right? And then also I sit on various boards and make decisions about how we're going to spend money, how we're going to, what initiatives are going to get the green light, and what priorities that we're going to take. That's all been a gradual process, right? Part of that has been me being intentional to learn leadership skills, right? One of the brothers with me today, right? I reached out to him. I said, listen, man, I want to bring you on board to help me do some of this work here, right? So being intentional to build up leaders. In IT, my IT background, I did nothing but look for people who were hungry, who had ambition, had some part of the skill set, but the hunger and the ambition was more important, right? I could teach anybody IT, right? But if you don't have any hunger or ambition, you can't work with me, right? No disrespect, right? So there has to be a hunger to change a condition, right? What drives me is I do not like the state of affairs for African Americans. I just can't live whatever timeline God has given me in this world. I have to make a contribution. I can't know what I know, have the privilege that I had of having two parents who worked hard, provided me a stable home, and provided me education, to not do something for my people, right? That's just the way I was wired, and that's part of the teaching that I was given, right? So for me, that hunger is always there. I'm always looking to see how we can help change our condition. I just got into a situation where we're doing a whole C3 and C4 nonprofit to do voter awareness, to get people out to the polls and all this other stuff too, right? There's always some work to do. So, though I am in positions of leadership, even before that, I tell you, I was, early in my IT career, I was on a help desk, which had no supervisor, right? I just said, well, we're going to organize this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, this is how we're going to do the work, the email's going to come in this way, we're going to answer them like this, and then we're going to send them out like this, right? Cool, good, we good? All right, let's go, right? I didn't have the title yet or anything. It's really about being a problem solver, right? And having a passion and a hunger to solve those problems, right? And then what it does this. I spent probably the good part of my late 20s reading autobiographies and biographies of successful African Americans. Because if I wanted to be one, I needed to know what the mindset of one is, right? Not to say the folks around me weren't that, but I just read a bunch of biographies, bunch of autobiographies, training myself, self-help books, going to school, taking classes. So I think first off, the thing is that there'll never be another Malcolm. There will never be another Martin. The times, I think, and the conditions and the timeline that created them don't currently exist. Although we do have current challenges that will create different types of leaders. And what I would say is this, is that we have to bring whatever we have to bear. Meaning that when the time calls for it, we can't say, oh, well, I'm just going to sit in the corner and just watch and see what happens. No, as you said, our young men need guidance, right? So for me, it's personally what I'm doing, right? I get up on Fridays and I give spiritual guidance, right? I go to rallies where I met Aziz and we walk the streets and we try to give guidance, right? I mentor young brothers in my sphere, young women too, right? Whether it's IT, whether it's the spiritual part, whether it's just leadership in general. And a part of the big thing that Imam Wafdi Muhammad always instilled was leadership. So every conference there were leadership workshops. He had books on leadership, because if you can put a fire under one or two people in this room, well, you need a couple people, 2 or 3, right? The results will be so much greater. So what I would say is this: there's no silver bullet for it, right? Our answers and our solutions have to be as complex as the problems are. And as you see, every time you come up with a new approach, there's a counter reaction, right? So we have to keep evolving, keep growing. And I think that within your own sphere of influence, the people that look up to you, that see you as a trusted messenger, honor that, right? Honor it as much as you can. And then is healthy. A lot of my friends are 60 plus. I'm 44. A lot of my friends are 60 plus, 65, right? I have lunch, I have coffee, we get on the phone sometimes. And I have mentors. I have people who have been there, done that, right? I'm trying to figure it out. Oh, no, just go do that. Boom, boom, boom. And then I got people that's 20-something that I'm mentoring, 30-something that I'm mentoring. I already see the road, right? There's no question for me, right? That's experience. So I would just humbly say that that within your sphere of influence, lean into it. If you don't have what you think it takes, right, go get it. Go find it. Get mentors. Make it a part of your mission. And I think it's really important, like you said, because we've had a whole generation of leaders be taken down through various means. I didn't even get into COINTELPRO, right? COINTELPRO was a government operation that basically attacked all of these institutions I just talked about. Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, various others, infiltrated, caused dissension, and a lot of times we're successful at breaking them up. And still probably still active to this day, right? When Malcolm X was assassinated, there were about a dozen informants and agents in the room, right? People were shocked by that, right? Exactly. About a dozen at least in that room. So that's a key thing to deal with as well. But I would say again, part of the work too is to shift perception as well, right? Like I know, I would just tell you this, I'm going pretty long here, but I know when 9/11 happened, right, and they were talking about all these sleeper cells in the country and all these terrorists everywhere, and at that point, I had been like a lot of places to a lot of mosques all over the country, different demographics, Southeast Asian, Arab, Black. I had never like accidentally walked up on a sleeper cell or people talking about doing anything, right? I'm like, if anybody would know, I would know. I'm like, this doesn't sound right to me, right? So part of my contribution was to go do a documentary and say, hey, man, maybe somewhere this stuff exists, but the overwhelming majority of Muslims in America are just here to survive just like you. We want to go to school just like you. We want to go to Disneyland just like you. We want to enjoy ourselves, have good food, and have family gatherings, go pray how we pray, and mind our business. Like all this other stuff, this is too much, right? So part of the work that I do is to shift that perception, right? Because a lot of times when I'm walking into spaces, I'm like the first Muslim they've personally met. So I just think that it's important. So just as this work was done to normalize Black life and Black people to the point where no one can say that we're not Americans anymore, right? Because that used to be a thing. Same thing has to happen with other groups, right? And some of the work that we do. That we have to be present in those spaces. We have to be intentional about our work and intentional about what we provide to the next generation and even our peers. Because some of our peers are still asleep. All right, so I hope that answers your question. And if you want to exchange afterwards, I'll be happy to do that. Mm-hmm. Brother Aziz, what's going on, man? How you doing? Sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm doing your job. Go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you if you could share some of the benefits of all of us, not just being invested in our own tribes, but to learn at the fountain of wisdom of the other. Ibn Arabi comes to mind, the one who says, do not love your faith so much that you don't appreciate the other.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Hillel says, if I am not for me, who will be for me?
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm only for myself, what am I?
Yeah.
We look around and learn and help and
Right. So, again, it reminds me of a saying of our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, in which he said, certainly, to want for your brother what you want for yourself, which is similar to the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you want them to do unto you. So this is part of our tradition. So I want to share a story really quickly that was one of those moments, I think, that really resonated with me and that's going to stick with me forever. I was invited to do an interfaith retreat in LA in October after October 7th. This was like, I think the 15th through the 19th or something like this. And it was going to be rabbis, imams, and pastors. And the imams were mostly Palestinian. So we got Palestinians, we got Jews, we got pastors all in a room for 3 or 4 days right after this catastrophe took place. And I'm asked to be there to help with this retreat. And I'm like, oh my God, this is heavy. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I know it's going to be a fight, and people are going to argue. And I didn't know. And I was really anxious about it. I'm just telling you, because I've been in the interfaith space for quite some time. I don't even see it as that, tell the truth. As a Muslim, I grew up and never, was segregated from Christians. So I don't even see it as a thing, really, even though it is a thing, right? But I don't see it that way. But anyway, I go to LA, and we set up, and we go through 3 questions. First, we're all together, split amongst the group. But then we're asked to huddle into our little tribes. 3 questions. What do you think about the other groups? What do you think about them? Second question. What do you think they think about you? Their opinion of you. What do you think about you? Third question. How would you like them to see you? What do you want them to think about you? So we huddle in our little corners, right? Write down on these big pads or whatever it was. And then we have to display it in front of everyone. What we think about each other, what they think about us, how we like to be seen. The most profound insight that came from that exercise was that everyone thought that everyone saw them worse than they actually saw them. That is, the worst stereotypes about each other that we get from the media, that we get from what we consume, we thought that the others thought that of us. And then we found that that wasn't always the case. It wasn't the case for the most part. So we came into a room with strangers, thinking they think that we're an enemy, right? They think that we don't like them, and we think that they don't like us. And the truth was, everyone wanted to be in community with each other. It was just these rumors, these stereotypes, these things that were in between us that kept us from genuinely engaging. And so once we got past that barrier, then we were able to open up and really engage. And then we were able to have some really great dialogue, really, because the goal of this retreat was really to walk away with mainly 2 things, well, 3 things actually, but the 2 things were, first off, to be an advocate for each other, right? When anti-Semitism pops up, a Muslim should speak out. When Islamophobia pops up, a Jew should speak out. When people are attacking the church, Muslims and Jews should speak up, should do something about it, should be there present. And we've had to do this because there have been churches that have been vandalized. We had to go to those churches and stand in front of them and be with the pastor. My mosque was vandalized this year, or well, last year now, March of last year, I think it was vandalized. The first 2 people there were a pastor and a rabbi that I work with. First 2. And we had a big press conference, of course, because you got to tell people that you got vandalized, right? And long story short, a whole community came out and supported us. So it's important that we stand up for each other in those moments. The second thing was for us to be in community, meaning that it's not enough for just the pastor and the rabbi to get along. Like, we're like the best of the best, you know what I mean? As far as Muslims, like the imam should be the best guy, right? The rabbi should be the best guy. I mean, the pastor should be the best too, right? Like the best behaved, best manners, right? So we should know how to get along. But it's the congregations, right? So we did an exercise there, but also as part of my triad here in the Philadelphia area, last Ramadan, leading up to Ramadan, We had them come to the mosque, and we taught them about Ramadan and what we eat and all these things, and shared our beliefs. We went to the synagogue and learned about their faith traditions and how they do their things. We went to the church and did all that, all of us together, not just me, but my congregation as well. The richness of it, what you learn from each other, what you see, the common humanity, right? And again, it helps you to dismiss stereotypes and all the things that divide us, right? So those are the things I would say. Awesome. Awesome. Sister Kathy, how are you? Thank you.
Let me just say, if we could have just a minute to say, what do we think about him? And I would simply say, Imam, what a gift you are. That's simply a symbol of who you have been for us. And we will leave here today advocating for one another, won't we? And we will work together to shape the future by honoring all that we learned about the past, and hopefully we'll continue to learn more. So we are so grateful. Can I give you a hug?
Thank you.